All right, so let me tell you how we're going to do this, just so you understand. We're actually going to record this because we think it could be a useful conversation for other people to hear that couldn't come tonight. So I'm going to interview John. I have 4 questions that I'm going to ask him, and then we'll open it up for questions. And so I hope you guys won't be, think that that's too sort of wooden.
That's right, we love it.
But that's what we're going to do. So, John, I don't know. I've never done this before. This is our first ever sort of PEF. Do you guys know that we're brother and sister? Yeah.
That's good to know.
Thank you for telling me.
Yeah. So John was a senior when I was a freshman, and we both had a little bit of a wandering journey with Christianity, but here we are, and God is good. And so, John has been involved, as you all know, in ministry to the poor for over 30 years. So my first question is, can you give us a summary of your personal path, founding and serving with Interchange, or even some pivotal moments where you felt like God redirected your path because you were heading in another direction, not a bad direction, but something, multiple things probably redirected you. So can you give us a little bit of insight into how you got where you are and, how God sort of moved your path?
Yeah, there were so many things actually that, if you consider your own lives, if you look back carefully, you see the fingerprints of God in your life pretty abundantly. And I'll really only share a few things, but in all that period of time that Deb was talking about, that I went up and down in the faith, which is really, it was countless times. I can't even tell you how many times I went forward to get saved and unsaved the next day. But the one thing I could never really walk away from in Scripture was the Good Samaritan story. And I know that's just a story. It wasn't even, stopping the woman in adultery, which is also just a dear story to me. But it was the Good Samaritan story. It was just so, it had such the ring of truth to it and such the ring of the divine. And as I was increasingly, I was a history major here, and I've always been very interested in international affairs and what was going on in the world. And then I went to Yale and studied international relations. And armed with the Good Samaritan story, I have to say that as I stood kind of ringside watching all this stuff happening around the world, I realized there was nothing natural in being neutral. And I had to do something about that. So I think to some extent my faith grew not as much in a propositional way as out of some of the necessities I was seeing in the world. I always love what Francis says, and I can't quote it directly, but he says, begin with what is necessary, then move to what is possible, and then you can do the impossible. And there was just some necessaries that I wanted to move into in the world. Not as somebody that I thought was a savior, but just somebody that I just had this real sense that God wanted to use my hands and feet to express His fingertip expressions in the world. So I think that was one of those things. Can I say one more thing on that too? Several things too. I was out of Princeton, and like some of you, I came in, probably some of you redirected, and maybe more of you do now. Originally I was coming in to be a doctor. Deb was also going to come in to be a doctor. It was kind of one of my mom's dreams for every single one of us. But I think one of the things that was really liberating for me as I left Princeton was I realized that I could, there are so many people, especially when you come to a place like Princeton, so many expectations that are breathed on you like like secondhand smoke from parents, relatives, financiers, etc. When I walked out of Princeton, I felt immediately liberated to actually find out how God had made me and why He made me. And one of the things that I did in 1979, I was a businessman in Japan, and I took the Trans-Siberian Railroad from one side of Russia to the other because my major in Princeton was American history and my minor was Russian history, and I'd always want to take the Trans-Siberian. And I'll be really brief with this story, but about 3 or 4 days into the first couple of days was really interesting because we were traveling up and down, and but when we were going across Siberia, which is this high plain, it's mostly forest, and we were just basically going arrow straight across miles and miles, sometimes for 6 or 8 hours. And I've always had an insomnia problem, and I woke up in the middle of the night one night, and it was one of those times where I felt like God had woken me up. And so I stuck my head out the window. It must have been 1 or 2 in the morning, because I was northerly enough in Russia that we weren't quite where white night was, but night was really short. So I know it was like about between 1 and 3 somewhere in there, because the sun was going to come up around 3:30. And I just stuck my head out the window, and it's one of the most beautiful things that I've seen, because we were almost like a 3/4 of a mile train. That they had turned most of the lights off because in Russia there just wasn't a lot of resource to drive anything other than what was military and provocative and aggressive. So you just had you had lights on the engines, and the engine, we had changed a train that was like a locomotive from the Western movies. It was just an old-fashioned thing. And smoke was billowing, smoke and steam was billowing off this locomotive like spirits into the night. It was just one of the most beautiful things, and I watched it curve, and it was pitch black night, and I just woke up and I just thought, I thank God for that. And then I felt like, actually, that's not all He's done here, because all of a sudden I realized that there was a string of lights that was stretching across this barren plain, just straight across. There were lights. And I felt like God said, I need you to pay attention to this. And so we were just flying at that point, because we would fly at night and then we'd go like 10, 20 miles an hour during the day, because basically they wanted you to travel on the Trans-Siberian, but they wanted you to see as little of Russia as possible, lest you see a bridge or military and stuff. So you just fly at night and cover all this ground and then crawl during the daytime. So we were flying at about 80 miles an hour, and we were moving towards this line of lights. It was like a meteor or a comet intersecting a constellation. It was just gorgeous. And just as we passed over this line of lights, I looked really intently, and it was just so quick, how these things are quick. And there was a ditch about as deep as this room, and guys, even though it was in Siberia, it was cold, stripped to the waist, sweating, with picks and shovels. And then there was the line of lights was every 100 yards or so, there would be a huge floodlight that would flood the guys laboring in the gulag. And then there would be a guard in like an old World War II jacket with a rifle who would be standing right in front of the light, so that you couldn't look up to see the guard without being blinded by the light. Does that make sense? And it was just over and done so fast. And it was, again, with that, going back to the Good Samaritan story, it was just one of those moments when I wished I could have gotten off the train. I don't know what I would have done. I just wished I could have gotten off the train, because I had seen something that was not just, that everybody else was saying was just reality. And there was nothing I could do about it. And so that as those kinds of experiences built up for me, I grew with more and more of a yearning to one day, I want to get off the train of my life and into this living tissue of pain and need in the world. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Okay, well, in your talk at IFF, you raised questions about the usefulness of short-term missions trips, and I understand that you're not saying something negative about all short-term missions trips. But what are some of the ways that you see to prepare and plan short-term missions opportunities that do have a positive impact for the host community and also provide an authentic exposure to real mission life for persons, students considering vocational ministry? And can you give any examples of short-term teams which have had a positive experience and made a difference?
Yeah, that's a lot of questions that you may help.
Yeah,
you may have to
I'll bring you back to some of them.
I want to clarify too, just to say, I think I said this on Friday night, but I'm an optimist, and I actually think most short-term mission trips are good or have good in them. What I was saying is that if it's all we do, and it doesn't connect or segue to something else. It doesn't segue to real relationship. It doesn't move a community towards transformation. Then I think it's unfortunate.
Okay.
And I also think, part of the reason, I think almost anything that's really good we should question. So also the fact that I'm questioning short-term mission, to me means it inherently is good enough to say, how can this be better, or let's really reflect on that. So ask your
So what is the way to bring inexperienced young people into a field in a way that utilizes them and but also gives them a good experience and helps them to be a help to the people that are actually in place there?
Yeah, I think that's good that you're. Let's just stay with young people coming out of Princeton. Let's be really specific, I think, because you guys are some of the most gifted. I hope not driven, but gifted and determined people that, in the hands of God, that's an incredible gifted world. But first and foremost, the biggest gift to your in a vulnerable community, if you want to convey value, is posture yourself as a learner and show that you can listen and you can learn. It's amazing. I watch so many missionaries go out, short-term, long-term, and it feels like everybody really struggles to be word made flesh, like moving into the neighborhood, learning culture, growing up like Jesus did, not at 30 but at 0. I think we're all impressed by how bad things are in the world and how quickly things should move, and so we either stay home and are more comfortable with word made word, and we have so many words, or we go, the ones of us that are inclined towards action, we become word made action. But word made flesh means going in as a person, as a learner, as a listener, realizing you're real gifted. And think about going into a slum like Cabrera or the Nueva Capital, where we have a team in Tegucigalpa, and you go in as this Western person with such independence and courage and ability just to fly into a place, and you go as a learner and you allow a person, maybe a single mom, maybe a granddad who's buried a lot of his kids to malnutrition, suddenly you're learning from him. It'll be the first time he or she has ever taught anybody, certainly from the West. Imagine what value that gives to that person. So imagine if you go with no language, and suddenly they're your language tutor. It's the first time you'll have gotten to teach a person like you. So one of the things that's a gift to you is I don't want to say your naivete, but the fact that you don't know how to be flesh in that neighborhood. And instead of trying to quick study it out of existence or end run around it by going to language school, if you can go into a neighborhood and learn what's the North and South Pole in that neighborhood and all their subjective realities from them, it's a huge thing. Because I think that's the other thing about short-term mission too, is we oftentimes proceed from as professionals and scientists and people that like clarity and fact, we start with the demographics and we acquaint ourselves with the need. But the fact of the matter is, most people that live in poor communities don't necessarily know the demographic. They don't necessarily know the need in that. They know it very subjectively. They feel it very emotionally. And sometimes they feel it very hurtfully, and that's what Jesus wants to meet. He doesn't want to meet the demographic tables. He doesn't want to. So the other thing I think that we do is when we learn from our neighbors, we ennoble them. And we also learn what we really need to learn, which is what are the subjective things, the emotional places where they're hurt and broken and they need to be, they need to have an interaction or an encounter with the living God. I didn't need to go so far.
No, that's great. You mentioned to me a couple of teams that had gone to Denver and to London, and I'm wondering if you can comment on some of the specific things that they did, or the specific ways they connected with that community, or even how the host workers help them either prepare ahead, or, can you give us some nuts and bolts of some of the successful teams you've seen, or successful even one-on-one visitors you've seen?
Yeah, we've had so many. The first thing I would say is that more is less. So, and what I mean by that is we typically send 2 to 4 interns, not necessarily from the same school. So you might be matched up with somebody from Wheaton or SBU, but we usually send 2 to 4 people, not more than that, to a site, because if you just send Anna to a site, well, Anna's a very special case, but if you just send one person, then you're really, that whole team is then responsible for everything. They're social, they're learning, they're all that kind of stuff. It can be not only lonely for the intern who doesn't have anybody who's peer to her or him to, but it can be hard on the community. So generally we send 2 to 4 people to a place. We've had a number of, some of the hardest ground that we're on is in London, because most of our neighbors are Bengali, and we also have a team in Bangladesh. And Bangladesh it's actually easier to evangelize in Bangladesh, despite the legislation now. It's easier relationally on the street to evangelize in Bangladesh, because Bangladeshi people are secure in their own country, as opposed to moving to what was the world's largest empire, and they either totally assimilate, which almost never happens in this particular people group, or they ratchet up their identity such that they are much more Muslim or much more fervent about Islam than they would be in Bangladesh, where no one's challenging them. So they intuit that in order to keep themselves from the taint of Western civilization, instead of colorful clothes and haphazard coverings, they are covered to just a slit in black, brown, or gray. It is very, very difficult to get access to people. But the people that have the easiest time reaching into that culture are bridge people. And what I mean by that is people your exact age, because the one thing all communities care about is, no matter how poor it is, they all care about their children. And when you come in at a bridge age between the parents and the kids, and you're exciting and you're single and you're there to give, it opens up all kinds of doors. And you can ask all kinds of questions that our staff that have moved into the neighborhood cannot ask. So I've just found that there's just a lot of ways that short-term people can be very helpful. Another way that they can be very helpful, this is just totally different, and I'll be really brief on this, is we've actually sent college students, because they're such incredibly good learners and they have good memories and minds. If we have a city that's safe enough, we will send a veteran leader, a veteran couple usually, 2 or 3 veteran leaders, for an entire 40-day summer exchange. We'll send a team to a place we've never explored before, and let university students explore that city. Sarah's, Debbie's daughter was almost joined a team that we put together to Denver just because she had medical abilities, and I needed her to research what the adequacy of the medical environment in the poorest place in Denver. I had another woman who was an artist that was going in to see what are the expressions on the walls, whether they're billboards, what are kids growing up learning? Is the Marlboro Man their hero? What is the imagery that saturates the place? What's the sustainability of the short bit? So I had a girl who was studying business. And it was just a really fun internship that I think it was really helpful to have university students because, again, in that largely Latino neighborhood, everybody wanted to help the university students because they thought they were helping them for their schoolwork. I mean, they just wanted to help them with their learning. So this is an age where a lot can happen, is what I'm saying, I guess. And so I wouldn't apologize for it. I just go wisely.
Yeah. Well, so can you tell us about your 40-day ministry internship?
Yeah,
how does that work?
The 40-day, I think we would have come up with 40 days because we didn't want to take over the university students' entire summer. And you have to understand in the UK and most of Europe, summer just doesn't last as long as it does here. So part of the reason that we cut our internship down to a 40-day window was because we wanted to have you be able to have time before you just not go from one thing tailgating another right back to school. But we also, I think, part of the reason we chose 40 was because, as you probably know from reading your Bible, 40 just comes up over and over and over as a threshold number, whether it's the people experiencing 40 years of learning in the wilderness, or Jesus growing into his spiritual authority in his wilderness. 40 days is actually a fairly dynamic number scripturally, and so we begin in San Francisco, where we have a house, and we've had multiple ministries to the homeless and others. We begin there with I don't know if it's 3 or probably 4-day orientation, which is not so much training, because we don't want to get you to go out as professionals. We want you to go out as learners and listeners, and we want you to go out as much as your true self as you possibly can. So we do a lot of inventory on what you think your spiritual gifts and your natural abilities, all those things that we never talk about in church. I mean, it always amazes me that, as John Piper would say, life is war, and we go to church to be taught what are our weapons, what are our spiritual, and I still don't know any church that does spiritual gifting and points it out. So that's one of the things that we do, because we're actually going into frontline situations. So we want you to have at least an alertness about what your spiritual gifts are. Do you have an instinct towards mercy? Do you have, and then all you'll be able to do is sort of comment on what you think those are, but all through those 40 days, we'll be watching and confirming. Actually, I don't see a lot of evidence of a teaching gift, but I do see a lot of evidence of, because that's actually the way spiritual gifts really emerge and flourish, is when people you trust are observant enough to say, Kara, is she really good at encouraging, or Sky, you're really good at, does that make sense? So that's a lot about orientation.
Yeah.
So then we send you out to the field and you spread. So you come in as a class, and sometimes there's 4 of you, and sometimes there's 8 of you, and usually there's several people that are emerging out of a slum or a barrio or a gang situation. So there's that also. So it's an exchange in the sense that it's fairly robust from the direction that you come from. And we send you to 2 to 3 teams a summer, whoever can handle an internship that summer. And then you're on the field for a couple of weeks, and then there's about a 3-day retreat in the middle, because as a Christian order, we take your sustainability very seriously. So we try to introduce you to a number of habits that will sustain you for that 40-day period, and give you as much exercise in those as possible. So you'll journal a lot, you'll do conversational prayer, you'll do group prayer, you'll do, we'll help you with a lot of different things, and hopefully a lot of those things will fail, so you can say, actually that's really not me, and it'll point you to what you are. But we do a 3-day experience in the middle to sort of give you a kind of to put up a mirror so that you can see your experience, and also so you can talk through some of your stories, so that those narratives, if when you tell those narratives, they actually become part of your life, don't they? Part of your life, don't they? So then you go then a little bit more pointed, a little more directed. You phase out. Then we always end with celebration. That sometimes you will design, sometimes your neighbors will design, sometimes all of the above will design, and then we send you back to San Francisco for debrief with all the people you met that first few days, and then we bless you and commission you to go on. And usually our interns keep on with us, and a lot of our interns end up becoming staff. But I will say this, we are just as pleased with the people that come and stay a summer and are transformed in some way and go into the public sector. We're really, really excited to graduate people into whatever God has for them. So,
Okay.
Is that enough on that?
Yeah. So I've heard you talk about the 99 and the 1. And I think I know what you mean by that, but I wanted to give you a chance to explain what you mean by that, and also if it has something to do with sort of our Ivy League tendency to always gravitate toward work that has big impact, big numbers, results that can be quantified on paper. Can you comment on that? And
Yeah, this has actually been a lot on my mind because I've been questioning the 1 and the 99 at a time when it feels like so much of the world is coming apart at the seam. You have more people in forced migration than at any time as you know, than at any time in our history since World War II. But then compounded by that, you've got trafficked people as well, which is another uncountable number. It doesn't even, we're just talking refugees in the first instance, and then you've got trafficked people and child soldiers and other people that are in some form of dislocation but aren't measurable. You've got wars, you've got brush fire wars, you've got encroachments by dangerous, aggressive countries, China camping out in the South China Sea, and Russia doing what it's doing, and moving, trying to normalize something that's pretty atrocious in a place like Ukraine. So you've got all of this going on, and then you've got places where you wouldn't even know, and we have work in places, I was telling Bill, that we can't even really talk about. I can talk about it in here, but I can't write about it because countries are doing such incredible surveillance now. I would endanger the people in these countries. So we have work. I think I said this when I spoke on Friday night, but in 61 years, I don't remember the world being this torn up. And then if I couple that with the fact that the country that probably can do the most good is so deeply invested in the bitterest election I've ever seen in my lifetime. So we're and I'm not saying we shouldn't be, but we are deeply embroiled in that, and it's polarized to such that there's a little overlap between red states and blue states. I just want to look at those red states. It's just, can we just be red letter Christians instead of red state, blue state? These are my. So I just think we're at a place where we actually really need, that we need to move from the we the people in the Constitution to we the children of God. If we stop thinking of ourselves as we the people and lower the political walls and let our hearts as Christians emerge, I think we could probably find a lot more constructive conversation and actually be that useful agency around the world. So I think basically what I'm saying here is that it just seems like all hell is breaking loose out in the world, and Jesus' strategy is always going to be this focal, trajectory of I'll choose the one, and he lives it out. I mean, Jesus comes to one of the tiniest, most kind of backwater little countries to incarnate salvation. I mean, he could have gone to China, he could have gone to Rome, he could have gone to any place with high voltage power lines that would have taken, but he first of all, he chooses the Hebrews, right? And then he goes and he nails his feet to the floor in Palestine. And one of the things that Richard Dawkins says about, if you know, he's a Brit and he writes in the God Delusion. He just said he was belittling this aspect of Christianity, that Jesus' choice of Palestine and other things like that he called excessively local and not worthy of a religion with world-class aspirations. And I just wanted to say to him, this was in a debate, I just wanted to just say to him, that's exactly the God he is. He is always going to go for the one in preference to the 99. Because actually quality, even when scale is against us, the numbers, I guess I'm saying this, numbers are always going to be on Satan's side. But when God goes to work, he likes to go to work deeply and with quality, and that's become so contagious that the times when the world is doing the best isn't because we've hit on some massive welfare project that is a one-size-fits-all. The world does best when there are tiny little pockets of people who take the one seriously, because when we take the one seriously, the most vulnerable, the deepest pit of poverty, the 99 go, there must be a God. Because if there was no God, we would just be doing the greatest good for the greatest number, right? So I think one of the things that you need that was helpful, I won't say you need to do, one of the things I needed to do as a Princetonian is I needed to resign from that expectation that bigger was better and that I was destined for some big impact. Because I feel like, I actually feel like Interchange has had huge impact, but it's not been professional, it's been deeply personal, and that's all of us, that's the God we want. We want God who's not just a career advisor, we want God who's a personal, intimate dad. So.
Okay, those are my questions. We want to open it to you guys, and you've been very patient. Anybody want to?
Yeah, I think you named a lot of them already. I think one, that you guys stay in touch and keep the reality of that time alive. Secondly, you said something about writing or journaling. So I met with a young lady earlier today who was asking about hearing from God and how is it that I've heard from God, which has grown over time. And I think I started hearing from God. I never expected to hear from God. I didn't know that it was really valid because I was hearing him through his word, and Deb was really responsible for that for me. I mean, that's one of the things I was going to say about keeping, how God works through community, but Deb really didn't let me, in all that period where I was going like this, she didn't really let me go. And when I was in Japan, knowing I didn't have a lot of resources, she just read your Bible every day. So I moved into the Gospels and camped there. And that's when I started to see that Jesus was a fairly unusual person. Anyway, all that to say, especially when you're on a mission trip like that, I would find a way to do as much journaling as you can, because I think what happens with, and how a lot of times God seems to begin speaking, I think he's actually speaking to all of you all the time, but you start to hear it because you start to write. Writing absolutely honestly for God, because I think what happens is God likes to speak after he realizes that you appreciate him as a listener. I mean, do you realize how much he listens and doesn't say a lot of stuff, isn't throwing out advice every time, turn left, turn right, date him, do not date him. I mean, it's amazing how powerful God is, and he walks so softly. So I think that what I found is that if I was willing to write down my rawest thoughts, and then start to appreciate how God listened to those, slowly but surely I started to hear God in an intimate way. I think the other thing is we prize the very dramatic, remarkable speaking from God. I've had a few of those. Actually, I've had quite a few of those, but only because I've been in really remarkable settings. I'm stopping a gang fight, for example. I like to get real direct message and do. But most of the time, because we have a God who wants an intimate relationship with you, it's pretty hard to do intimacy if you're shouting. And a lot of us want drama, shouting, show me clearly. Well, that's not intimacy. So I think that's the other thing too, is you have to start, what happens is once you start communicating to God more, he helps you start to distinguish the voice in your head, and then you realize that there is a frequency he's on. So that's been my experience. I don't want to normalize that. I'm just saying I think God's an incredible listener, and because I appreciated that, I think he felt more free to talk to me because I wasn't constantly badgering him to speak to me in some dramatic way that I could then share with my neighbors. So anyway, I have ADD, and I kind of got off there. So did I answer your question, Bo? I think the other thing is that I would say is, and I didn't necessarily do this well early on, right? But what you got to do was a real privilege. So staying thankful for that. Because honestly, we are driven by a culture of self with all its cardinal sins of stuff, success, status, security. And when you have an experience like that, that's a little bit of an antidote to that, you can come back and not condemn everything. You just can go through the eye of the needle. Nobody's saying you should batter down all the stuff in America and our system and structure. Just gracefully, humbly thank the Lord that you had an experience that deepens you as a person so that you're at least a tiny bit more liberated from all the stuff that drives us. So I think that's the other thing is prize it as something to be thankful for, and don't use it as a thing to bash others with that did or didn't go. I would more prayerfully pray for them to be able to have that kind of or another experience like that. And then after an experience like that, I'd go to a deeper one next, deeper, longer, and see, so until you get sort of more of a clarity of how is God, I'm going to be a doctor, where could I be most used? Or I'm going to be working on water. 20 out of the 34 largest aquifers in the world now, something like 27 of them are compromised, and most of them are compromised in the world's poorest places. So there's all sorts of things that you could do with what you're studying here in a way that has immediate resonance with people in need around the world. So.
Yeah, well, I would add to that I think as Christian students, God wants you to consider how to be uniquely Christian in your field, and you should be considering a non-traditional path for the use of your education and your talents, and so one way to not become cynical is to really continue exploring how these Princeton training years will enable you to do something practical later on in perhaps a place that has a lot less resources. So
I can't stress how important what you just said is, actually, just because our generation, I think, when we're compelled by need and fearful things in the world, as Christians, too many of us gated off our lives and look for ways to keep our kids safe. And all of these are good things. They're really, really good things. But what happens if you gate off long enough, you become gated. And you're now locked in. And you don't have the ability to actually see what's happening in the world, and you miss your opportunity to change it. So I agree with Deb completely. It's just, however God's made you, I mean, look at our election right now. It sure as heck would be nice to have a leader that, I mean, that's the other thing about the world right now is, and not just in this country, I can't, and I'm very, very dispassionate about this, because this is what I studied at Yale and Internet. I can't look anywhere in the world with confidence about the leaders that are there. So, as Debbie said, there's multiple things that you can do that will take everything you have. They will take your drive, but let God draw you. Don't get driven into something else. Does that make sense? So he'll give you a drive on something he's drawing you into, but don't drive yourself into something that you think is going to be blessed by society or fulfill somebody's expectations. And don't be afraid to explore lots of things and then redirect. What I would say is, and again, I think you probably know the answer to this, and this is where you're better fortified than I was in my day here at Princeton. There are so many good voices here that people that really care about you, that sacrifice for you, to listen to you. So don't be afraid to take your dearest dreams to people you trust, and use the body as what it's meant to be, as a mirror. And then if I were exploring South Africa, I'd get down there. I'd find a short-term trip to go, because like I said, it's valid to explore. It's valid to explore and see, I think I have an encouraging gift, or I think I have a mercy gift, or I think I have a teaching gift. Try to find a setting where you can explore that. And I know that sounds a little bit self-serving, and that sounds contrary to what I'm saying, but I'm just telling you that healthy self-examination now will shut down unhealthy self-doubt in midlife. This is the time to explore stuff. Not 40 years old when you look in the mirror and all you are is your profession, and you off-road because you realize, I'm not doing anything that I like, I'm not doing anything that's meaningful to me. So you're supposed to be exploring at this point in time. And in the process, going as a learner and a listener. So it's all about attitude. But there's nothing wrong with going on short-term efforts, because that's all that you have time budgeted for right now, to try to get a feel for what this personal God is drawing you into. And that ain't all going to come in a prayer closet. It has to be worked out in a good place.
Any other questions?
So you alluded to, excuse me, that sometimes young adults, short-term people can ask certain questions and engage in ways that, as singles and newcomers, what would be a few ways that they would be able to be? What are some of those questions? What are some of those entry points that a young college student may have, that even married people in that community don't have?
Yeah. So if I mean, every community is so different. That's for starters. So one of the things, I'll get to your question. One of the things that we have to do is when we go into Tegucigalpa, we go into Shela, Guatemala, we go to Caracas, Venezuela. We have to be able to shelve our notions of the miseries of what poor people. They're out there and they're legion. But we have to learn that in the place. Because if we come in with preconceived ideas of, they're probably all struggling with drugs, or they're all sniffing glue, or they're all losing their kids, or their kids are in gangs, it's good to actually, so first and foremost, you should come in that way as a learner. But one of the things that I think university students are really able to do because they care. They've been kids not that long ago, so they can look at moms and that clearly are either struggling or dad because the dad is having to work 2 jobs or whatever, and just you can ask that mom, what are your kids facing, stuff like that, and then they can tell you, and they. And before you know it, they might be asking, can you watch my kids while I go to the legal aid? Or can you watch or could you take my kid to something that I can't do? So before you know it, you can be a bridge between somebody who cares deeply about their kids, but because they don't maybe have time and focus, aren't able to do a lot about that. So I can't stress enough the bridge that university kids can play with with children. Conversely, here's the other thing that they can do, because we have this idea that sometimes people in slums and barrios are hardly working at all, and actually they're scrambling all over the place. The other community that's very, very much at risk is the older people. So that's the other thing I see university people do so incredibly well, especially if they have enough language or a patient to work through a translator, is in finding out, in some of these slums that have been haphazardly put up, it looks like they just happened and they're accidental, but they all have. I mean, they're think of the people moving to Egypt, from rural parts of Israel. All these people have interesting stories of why they've now come and nailed to whatever available ground is on the outskirts of Caracas. If you go to the old people and say, tell me about your community, how did it start? And tell me your life story. It's just, to have an older person I can't tell you how many times I do it when it's going nowhere in missionary. I went to Jackson one time because I'm so interested in the civil rights movement. And I just went from street to street, and I sat up on window seats and stuff and porches with old ladies and asked them what happened in the civil rights age. It was the most fun thing I've done. Didn't have to go anywhere. It just was fun. So all that to say, I think university students kind of fly under the radar because people all over the world identify them as earnest learners, and so I think you should take advantage of that.
Any other questions?
Do you have any, the 99-1 principle, I guess you didn't call it a principle, but that sort of way of thinking, how would you apply it to, currently being a student at Princeton? I guess you're saying you take up causes that maybe seem less broadly effective, but, are deep and personalized, is what I'm hearing you say. So is there a way that, a student could live that out while they're a student? What might be other ways to apply that?
I think one of the reasons that God told that story about the 1 and the 99 is because of the way we do. We always want to package, addressing stuff, and I think for years one of the things the enemy has done is he's disguised poverty as a lack of resources, and really what at its heart it's a lack of love. Hence the one, go personally, go as Word made flesh, etc. How to do that from Princeton?
Or in Princeton?
In Princeton as a student. I don't know that I can answer that question, Anna, because I don't think I did that well. And I don't like to speak about stuff that I don't have experience with. Now, wherever I am, I try to notice who's not being noticed. And I try to, if I'm going to give to a homeless person, which isn't my ministry normally, I sit down on the curb and talk first. And sometimes I give and sometimes I don't. But I try to be, personal. But there's actually a lot of stuff going on in Princeton right now, and none of it's social upheaval, but there's some hurting people, and there's a whole lecture series I think that one of your professors is doing on race. So there's a lot that you could not just attend the lecture to figure out what your opinion is, but
attend the lecture to meet the person to find out what could be done in the. But I think, you know, beyond that, I think you guys are ministry leaders that are finding places of need, whether it's in the student body or in the town, and helping to mobilize people towards those. So, but those small things are, I guess what I'm saying is going to the one, whether it's in Cabarrus slum or Princeton town, I don't think he has a hierarchy. Because I think when you're all powerful, you don't have to prioritize, do you? Because it is going to all get done. And I think we live in a finite bodies and finite time. And so I'm not saying you shouldn't maximize your time, but I think we should demystify that process a little, because we get harassed to want to, you know, put all of our gifting and everything into the biggest bang. So I would just get some exercise with people in the margins at first, and those margins usually take you to other margins. And there are, I guarantee you, I mean, I've seen a few margins in town, and I've only been here a couple of days. You guys are great to listen to, so I very much appreciate you coming for kind of round two. You can sort of see why I woke up the next morning thinking, I wish I had said a little more.
Thank you all for coming.